Yep.
value.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And especially if you're combining that with the lack of time and that potentially something might not be coming up until it's become problematic or it has an immediate deadline.
Right.
That makes a lot of
Yes.
sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, we touched on this earlier, but do you? Or actually, no. Let's stay with. Are there any other things that you think are keeping the board up at night or keeping the chief operating officer up at night as they think about just the functioning of the organization?
Um, I mean, I do think that sort of how to respond to and where to go if something goes wrong
Mm.
is often on the minds of those of people in those roles. It's like there's you can have things in a kind of a steady state as long as things are turning over as they're meant to do. But if you're suddenly kind of adding something new into the mix that is a time suck and also requires specialized knowledge, the question of sort of where to go for that, how to be able
Mm-hmm.
to make a choice on what you need or who you want to work on quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And that can sometimes lead to, I think, organizations going with sort of what or who is available first because they have a problem or a challenge that needs to be solved quickly, and they probably wouldn't feel like they have the time or the ability to have a sort of a request for proposals or kind of
Right.
an interview process. They're going to go with who board member A recommends or who someone from their network, when they send out an email saying, do you know anyone who can help us on this, who they hear back from first.
Mm. Yep, that makes sense.
And then I think the other thing
Yeah, go ahead.
that is a dynamic, and this is probably worrying COOs, but I would think as much or more the executive directors, the CEOs, and the boards, is the concern around sort of reputational risk or sort of communications risk. I mean, particularly for any nonprofit or foundation that's working in an area that might be seen as controversial. The
Mm-hmm.
fear that any misstep is going to be sort of taken and used against them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Interesting. And so again, it feels like there's not enough time in the day potentially to be experts on all the things that you're working in on. And on the flip side, there's no room for mistake, especially when it comes to the more sensitive topic areas. So that's
Right.
a tough
Yeah.
tightrope right there.
Yeah.
Um, hmm. Interesting. Do you have, as we've gone through this conversation so far, and talked about sort of broad scenarios, are there any examples of tools, or examples of, either specific tools and products or stories that you've seen from your experience that have come to mind as we've talked through these scenarios so far?
Yeah. I mean, I think one interesting model to look at, sort of from what I gather you might be interested in doing, or the way that you might want to work, is to look at Salesforce and the Salesforce Foundation. I think they've
Mm-hmm.
done a good job within their CSR strategy of thinking about how they
Mm-hmm.
can provide tools to nonprofits. So really thinking about how their product can be helpful, not just
Yeah.
financial donations. And they're
Yeah.
obviously in a position where their product is something that is useful
Right.
to nonprofits. and